So may the words of my mouth and meditations of all of our hearts be found to be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. All right, y'all go ahead and take a seat, and I want to let the kids know they can go on to Wow Worship Children's Church at this time if they would like.
Great job. I'll run in front of the house.
Like that. All right. Okay, so growing up, we did a whole lot of camping in my family, and we would go to all the state parks around Texas. And one of my favorite has to be Enchanted Rock. Have y'all been out there? You know? Okay, and so, you know, there's a huge rock that is just out in the middle of hill country. You can climb it and get to the top. Woohoo, I made it! But something that you might not realize when you go there, it was a couple of times I was there before I even found out about these caves that are in Enchanted Rock. Have you seen these? And you can, like, there's a little tiny entrance, and unless you think that I'm kidding, that's how small the spaces get at some points in these caves that go throughout the rock, and you can go from one side to the other. And I don't know, a few years, like, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe, we went with a group of friends, and there were about 10 or 15 of us in these caves. And it is tight, and it gets dark at certain points. And I was about halfway down the line of friends. So there were about 6 or 7 people in front of me, I guess. And I could not, for the life of me, see the person who was leading the way. Now, my friend who was leading the way had been through the caverns before. He knew the direction to go, and I had confidence in him. But try as I might, I couldn't see him, right? Because it was dark, and I had a few people between him and me. And so there we were going through these caves, and I was just kind of like hoping, you know. I was like, well, I trust that person, and I know that they've done it before and that they'll lead me through. And so eventually, you know, even though a couple of us maybe got stuck along the way, they got unstuck eventually, and we made it all the way through to the other side of the cavern. And we had a great time. And I knew it was going to turn out all right, because even though I couldn't see the leader, I was following someone who was following the leader. You know what I'm saying? This is something that we don't often talk about as it applies to our spiritual lives. I think we like to think of our life with God as just me and God, God and me. I don't need to go through anybody else. I don't need to talk to anybody else about it. I don't need to follow anybody else. Not only do I not need to, I'm not supposed to. I should follow God alone. Right? And that's right. Each one of us was afforded direct connection with God through the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. But there are times that we don't quite like to talk about. Times like Mother Teresa referred to in a letter to a friend when she said, quote, Jesus has a very special love for you, but as for me, the silence and the emptiness is so great that I look and I do not see, I listen and I do not hear. And this is something we learned about Mother Teresa after she passed and her private letters were published, that there were many times, I mean, this is Mother Teresa for crying out loud, there were many times, though, that she felt disconnected from God. Like, she knew God was ahead of her and was planning the way, but she couldn't see God. She couldn't hear from God herself. And there are times, like me in the caves, where we know that God is ahead of us, leading the way, but we can't see him as much as we keep craning our necks to get a peek. So what do we do in times like that? When we want to follow the Lord, but we're in a season in our lives where we can't see him very easily, and we're having a hard time hearing his voice. Or maybe we haven't ever met him yet for ourselves, but we really want to. What do we do in these times where we want to follow God, but we're having a hard time figuring out where God is and how to hear from him? Well, this is where Ruth's story is incredibly helpful, because more than anything else, Ruth knew the value of following a follower. And we're going to dive into her story today. And it's a colorful one, and a story of a woman who definitely encountered challenges, but who saw God bring good out of it all in the end. Now, I want to warn you, I read the story of Ruth a little differently than perhaps you have heard in the past. And I do that based on some significant study of this text. So I ask that this morning you be willing to just go with me for a little while, consider a different perspective, and reserve judgment till the end. Is that okay? You willing to give that a shot? Okay, excellent. Here's the second thing I want you to remember. The way I feel about Ruth's mother-in-law is not at all the way that I feel about my own mother-in-law. Okay? And it's really important to me that you know that and that you repeat it in case she ever should. By the way, I don't know if y'all met Karen Kirkpatrick. My mother-in-law decided to come to church today. Okay. Yeah, this day, right? Of course. Okay, so we're going to start off by reading from Ruth chapter 1, okay? So go ahead and grab the Bible and open up, or you can pull it up on your phone. Ruth is before Samuel and Kings, but after Judges. It's really short, so it's easy to pass up. I'll give you a second. Okay, here we go. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and their 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. And they went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with just her 2 sons. And these took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And when they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food once again. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grants that you may find security, each of you, in the house of a new husband." And then she kissed them, and they wept aloud, and they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me. Even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters. It's been far more bitter for me than it has been for you. Because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again, and Orpah got out of there. She kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law's gone back to her people and her gods. So just why don't you go with them?" But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and even more as well, if even death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said to them, "Call me no longer Naomi, but call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" This is the word of God for the people of God. Oh my goodness. Okay, to be fair, to start off with, Naomi has been through incredible tragedy, right? I mean, she's experienced significant loss in her life, and I have understanding for that, and there's total compassion there. But I think that sometimes she kind of, I don't know. Well, let's see. The names in the book of Ruth matter a whole lot. They give us a lot of information, and if we don't know what they mean in the Hebrew, then we kind of lose some of that. So they live in the town of Bethlehem, which, as you know, is where Jesus was born. Bethlehem means house of bread. Okay? So they live in the house of bread, but now there's a famine in the house of bread. So this place where they thought they were safe and secure and had everything they needed, a place of abundance and plenty, has become a place where there's not enough. And so, and it seems a little bit like the grass is always greener on the other side kind of people, and so they decide to leave Bethlehem and go to a place where nobody worships God, and they're going to be kind of like on their own in a way. And so they do. They leave, and they go to Moab, Elimelech. Now, Elimelech means God is king. And what very little information we get from his life, we get the sense that, for what we know from his name and everything, he assumed, like, he was a faithful person who trusted in God, and he is king. He was married to Naomi. Naomi means pleasant, okay? So she was a pleasant woman, at least to begin with. And then they named their sons Mahlon and Chilion. Now, Mahlon and Chilion mean sickness and destruction. Okay? So I don't know if that was at the top of the baby name list or what's going on in the year 1223 BC or what. I don't know how I would feel if my mom named me sickness, but at any rate, that's what she did. And so they all moved out to Moab. And for whatever reason, we don't know what caused it. Elimelech passes away, and eventually sickness and destruction die too. And so now all that's left are the women. Now I want you to notice that Naomi didn't talk to Orpah and Ruth whenever they were still back at home. Whenever they were home, they were packing up, and Naomi was considering, well, now the grass is greener on the other side, back in Bethlehem, and there's no famine anymore, I'm going to go back there. She didn't talk to them back then when they were packing up to go. She waits until they pack up all of their belongings, and they're already out on the road, walking to Bethlehem, whenever she's like, well, by the way, if you don't want to come with me, that's fine. It seems a little manipulative to me, right? To wait until that moment to let them go. But that's how she handles it. And Ruth, of course, decides to stay with her and follows Naomi out to Bethlehem. When they arrive, they have no food, no income. And so Ruth goes out into the fields to glean. Now, this is something that God set up in the Old Testament, where people who have fields and crops, they go through and they harvest those crops and they bring it all in, but most people in that region would go back a second time and pick up everything that dropped along the way, right? So they would do a really good job of harvesting, but of course some things would fall to the ground and they would miss some things as they went along, and so they would come back a second time and do a sweep. Well, God said, no, don't do that. Instead, there's going to be poor people in your community who don't have land of their own or a way to get access to food. So that second trip around, don't do it. That's going to be for the poor. And they have the right to come onto your property and to take whatever is left. That's called gleaning. Okay? And so, not everybody did it because they were greedy. They wanted it for themselves. And so, Ruth finds a field where she can go gleaning. And she does. And she comes back home at the end of the day, and she has a whole lot more with her than Naomi expected her to have. And Naomi's kind of like, all right, give me the business. And Ruth explains that there was a man who kind of took her under his wing and said, look, I see you're a vulnerable young widow, and I don't want anyone to harm you, take advantage of you, so you stay here. If you need something to drink, take it out of my well. You're going to be safe here. And Naomi realizes there is an opportunity here. Okay? So then, this is where it gets PG-13. So, Naomi hatches a plan, okay? And she says, look, Ruth, here's what I want you to do. I want to wait until it's dark out, okay? Wait till Boaz has put back a few, and he has fallen asleep. And so, this is what Ruth does. She does exactly what Naomi tells her to do. She waits until it's dark. She waits until he's had a few to drink and that he has fallen asleep. And she goes exactly the way that she's told to by Naomi, stealthily, it says, okay, up to him and uncovers his feet and lies at his feet. Now here's the thing, friends. You know how when they say somebody kicked the bucket, what they really meant was something else? Okay, whenever they say she uncovered his feet, what they mean is she uncovered his feet, okay? And so Ruth is just doing what Naomi told her to do and uncovering his feet and laying there at his feet. And so he wakes up and he's thinking, oh my gosh, you know, what if anybody sees this? My reputation is going to be gone. So Naomi has constructed a situation where she's basically blackmailed Boaz into accepting Ruth as his wife. Now, from what we can tell, Boaz was a good and upright, righteous man. Ruth seems to have been a pretty good person. Her name, by the way, means friend. And so, who knows, they might have ended up getting married anyway. But Naomi arranged it to make sure that it happened, right? And so here in the chapter 4, they get married, and Ruth has a child. And there's this really interesting part here that just, in my mind, clinches the whole thing. In chapter 4 of Ruth, in like verse 16, Naomi took the child, Naomi took the child that Ruth just had, laid him in her lap, became his nurse, and the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." What? Okay. And they named him Obed, and Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David. Okay. There is a new show on Netflix that if you have missed it, you really haven't missed anything. It's called Splash and Bubbles. It's a kid's cartoon. And it is about like fish in the sea. And one of the songs that they do over and over again, one of the fish sings, goes like this. I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just doing it. And he sings this all the time. I don't know what I'm doing. It's like really character building stuff, this episode, this whole show. I'm glad my kids have found it. And anyway, Splash and Bubbles, here's this thing. And I was thinking, Ruth really didn't know what she was getting herself into whenever she decided to go with Naomi. She didn't know how it was going to end up. She's going to a land she'd never been to before. She didn't know what kind of people she was going to encounter or what their customs would be or what her life would turn out as. She didn't know what she was doing. She's just going. She's just doing it, right? But then she did know one thing. As she follows little Miss Bitter out to Bethlehem, she knows that Ruth knows the Lord. Okay? And from Ruth's perspective, back home in Moab, no one believed in the Lord. So Naomi was the only lifeline to God that Ruth had. So it was either go back and follow their way of life in Moab, or go with Naomi and follow hers. And so even though, in my estimation, Naomi struggled sometimes to live out her faith, as we all do from time to time, Naomi was still the right guide for Ruth. And the same is true for many of us, I think. The person who first introduced us to the Lord probably wasn't perfect, probably had some flaws, perhaps even some significant ones. And sometimes it can be hard for folks to separate out the faith from the flaws of the person who first introduced them to it. You see folks who get burned in a church when they're young, and they'll just never go back to it ever again because they have a hard time separating the flaws of that place or that person from the faith itself, right? And so that's what's going on here for Ruth. Even though Naomi had those flaws, at least she introduced Ruth to the Lord. And since we're a faith that's full of sinners and we all receive grace, at least these folks paved the way for us to get to know God ourselves. This is part of the beauty of Ruth's story. The people we follow, politically, personally, professionally, are not going to be perfect. And even the ones who follow the Lord are not going to live out their life with God perfectly. But where Ruth was, there was everything familiar to her, her home and her friends and her family, but none of them followed God. And so she courageously chose to follow the follower of the Lord, all the way to Bethlehem. But Ruth is the woman who actually follows two people in this story. She follows Naomi to Bethlehem, but she also follows Boaz into marriage. And Boaz's faith seems to be lived out a little more straightforwardly than Miss Bitter's and Naomi's. God said, let the poor glean. Here's Boaz letting them glean. He saw a vulnerable widow who could be taken advantage of, and he provided her safety and security. Taking care of the widow, orphan, and immigrant is, by the way, one of the most common commands God has throughout all of Scripture. And so here is Boaz doing it. God told his people to serve as kinsmen redeemers for their in-laws, and Boaz was presented with an opportunity here with Ruth, and so he took it. Boaz was worth following because he was a follower of God, and so Ruth followed him into marriage. Even as we follow the Lord, There are all kinds of circumstances in which we take the lead from somebody else, right? Our spouse, our boss, our pastor, our friend. And especially for those times when, like Mother Teresa, like we were talking about earlier, when we feel like we know that God is ahead of us and we trust that He's there leading the way, but we can't quite catch a glimpse of Him ourselves, we need to be looking for these two qualities in a person that you're considering following. First, that they're a person who speaks the faith. Despite her flaws, Naomi talks about God all the time in this book, and Boaz was a person of faith too. It's hard to know if somebody follows the Lord if they never say anything that indicates that. They could be a really nice person, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they know the Lord. This narrows the playing field for us because a whole lot of Christians today are not really comfortable talking about their faith. And so whenever we say you need to find someone who's willing to speak their faith, that kind of narrows it down. However, if we're not comfortable speaking our faith, we probably shouldn't be leading others in the faith. The second quality, not only that they can speak it, but also that they live it, right? This is not rocket science, but wolves often wear sheep's clothing, and they can talk a good game, and they end up being manipulators or harming others. That's not what we're talking about here. Instead, we're looking for people who both speak their faith and live their faith in action. Now, there's only one caveat to that I want to mention this morning. They at least need a desire to speak it and live it. Just like Naomi, none of us are going to get it right all the time. Our spouse or our boss or whoever, a friend, might be a godly person. That doesn't mean they're always going to be godly, right? They're going to make mistakes from time to time. But you at least want to find people who have a desire to speak their faith and to live their faith out loud. Okay? Ruth discerned in Naomi a desire to speak her faith and live her faith, even if she didn't always execute it perfectly. And as long as the desire and intention is there, so is the direction from the Lord and grace. As we look at the life of Ruth, I want you to remember that in your family, if you're going to follow someone or align yourself with them, make sure they're following the Lord. At work, as much as possible, look for the company that you work for, the boss you work for, to be someone who is following the Lord, or at least is acting in a way that would please God. When considering getting married, make sure the person you're following into marriage is someone who themselves is following the Lord. When you're looking for new friends, make sure the ones you pick are the ones who follow the Lord, because where they go, you're going to go, and their people are going to become your people, and their gods will be your gods. This morning, we celebrate the fact that even when we don't totally know what we're doing, even whenever we can't see God ourselves, and we know He's up there leading the way, but we can't quite figure out where He is, God has provided us with a community of believers through whom we can get glimpses of God and can follow all the way down to the Lord. And so when we follow, just make sure you're following someone who follows the Lord. And then the Lord will be the one who's leading the way, all the way out of the cave and back into the light. Let's pray together. God, we thank you for the fact that in addition to yourself, you gave us a community through which we can experience you. And so that even when our eyes are kind of foggy and we have a hard time hearing from you and seeing you, that you have provided us a way through one another. So help us to both know who to follow and also become the kind of leaders that are worth other people following as well. Because we're so grateful for the fact that we know that no matter what, there is a God who is leading the way. And you will fill us up with enough trust and faith to keep following you, even if we can't see you. We offer this time of offering to you now, Lord. We thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your kingdom work that you're doing. Just this week, we saw new kids learning Bible stories, and we have support groups for people who are struggling, and we have scout ministries where kids are learning more about how to be good citizens and good Christians, and all these things we get to be a part of as we give a portion of our gifts back to you. So thank you for that opportunity, Lord. Bless these gifts as you receive them, that they would be used for your kingdom purposes in our church, in our community, and around the world. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray.